These are the words of the Lord to the false pastors of the Christian church. This is around the world. God is addressing the false ministers. He is addressing the false prophets. He is addressing those who download their sermon from sermon.com. He is addressing the Baphomets and the elites and the Illuminati pastors around the world. Please don't think that this is a U.S. phenomenon. The Baphomet goes around the world. These elite groupings go around the world. God says, you have had your last chance. You are being sat down and removed from the heavenly office. False prophets, false pastors, you take my kindness for weakness. You think because I have tolerated you that I have a part with you, but that is not so. I am the Lord, holy and righteous. I have no part with the wicked. You will be taken down. Come off the field and take off my uniform. You don't represent me anymore. I am not giving you any more time. Come off the field and be removed from the house of God. And so the Lord was saying that he's going to sit down false pastors, false prophets, false leaders, false apostles, anyone else who has, first of all, you styled yourself to be a fivefold minister and you are not. The fivefold ministry is a divine office. It is given by God. You don't take it up. No man takes this honor to himself. It is the Lord who gives it, regardless of if it's evangelist, regardless if it's a teacher. The Lord is the one who assigns to a person that he called you to be a pastor. He called you to be an apostle. So this is a calling. It is not an assignee. And many people have been ordained wrongly at the desire of men. It is the desire of a pastor. Many of these pastors, they ordain their wives or they ordain their friend or they identify a person in the church who has zeal. Just because someone has zeal in the church, okay, and the person has been in the church a long time and the person has displayed fruit and everything, it doesn't mean that the person is a pastor. And the reason I'm saying this is because all the fivefold offices come with intense warfare. All fivefold offices come with intense warfare, and the warfare varies according to the calling. It varies according to what the vessel can bear, but it also varies according to what the purpose God has for the vessel is. If the Lord has a purpose for the vessel that is very great, the warfare will be out of this world. So if God has given someone a global ministry, an international ministry, then you are going to get straight up pythons and wolves and dragons as your opponents spiritually. But if you are, for instance, a youth pastor in a church that is no bigger than 200, 300 people, and if you are rightly called, God has that calling upon your life, and your pastor is wise and astute and is praying to God, who should I raise up? And the Lord brings up the image of the young man's face, brings up the name of the person to be an elder, brings up the name of the person to be a deacon or a deaconess. Then yes, when the pastor moves in order and ordains that person, because you are standing rightly in your position, you are a peg rightly positioned in place, then the warfare will not be as much because the pastor has done rightly. Your pastor ordains you and you are just a faithful deacon, and because you've been a deacon for 10 years and you're faithful and you know how to rightly do the Bible study, and then he now makes you an assistant pastor and a pastor, and yet there's no calling of that office upon you, the warfare will hit you 10 times harder. Why? You were never created to be standing in that position. Both you and the pastor, mostly the pastor who ordained you, are going to have to answer to God for ordaining out of space. And a lot of pastors, they lack discernment. They look at hard work and they think it means that there's a calling there. That doesn't mean that. I see so many people, even up to the apostleship, ordained out of a snowy day. You can look at the person and see that God never picks this person. This one was born of the will of man. And a tree planted of the will of man, I guess, it's just like a GMO fruit, you know? You work at it hard enough and it can produce fruit. It will never be as flowering and it will never be as abundantly fruitful as something that is effortlessly created to do what God has called it to do. And so God is saying that to those who are false, that's the first level of false. They never called you and you just went. You were not sent. You just went, or you were just raised up, you know. God is going to sit you down and remove you from an office that you were never supposed to be in. And these things were covered in 2022. It is called The End of the Way of the Wicked, and the way of the wicked is darkness and thorns, where God was saying that all those who have picked up a microphone and started preaching and he didn't call you, he's just going to remove you because you are a nuisance and you make noise in his ears, and he's going to bring an end to that. And people like Mike Todd and Stephen Furtick are perfect examples of that. And then there are people who are definitely called. They're definitely chosen. This is the T.D. Jakes. This is definitely the Eddie Longs. They were called. The anointing on them. You have to be young and you have to be new to think that T.D. Jakes was always false. And you also have to lack discernment because he was none of those things. He had it, and even the Lord said in the 2021 prophecy, Cornucopia, which talks exclusively about the fall of ministers. Cornucopia part 1, 2, and 3. It's about the fall of ministers. God says that not only did Bishop Jakes used to have it, he had it twice over. He was given a double portion, which is very rare in this earth, for God to give you 2 times over, and to defile that is a great tragedy indeed. And God says that the false pastors, false prophets, and leaders and things like that, they have taken his kindness for weakness. And why? Because God bears long. God is God exemplifies long suffering. So he says they have taken his kindness for weakness, and they think that because he continues to tolerate them. This is the example of King Saul, because they still have a ministry and they still have gullible people, goats, who come to their church to hear the chief goat preaching. Because the church is still standing, because the church is still existing, because the church is still going on, people without wisdom look at it and say, oh, you see, they haven't fallen and they're still there. And God is saying that he's merely being tolerant. And the fact that he tolerates, they think that God then is saying, I'm with you. I have a part with you. But he says, I have no part with the wicked. And for that, we can just look at Exodus chapter 34 and verse 7. It says here, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. And the phrase we're looking for here is by no means clearing the guilty.